Today, we journey into the dark, foreboding world of Sanctuary to explore the complete lore of the original Diablo. Over the next couple hours, we'll uncover the cosmic horror that began it all, the tragic fall of kings and princes, and the birth of a legend that would define action RPGs forever. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin this epic adventure together into the depths of the Tristram Cathedral. Chapter 1. The Cosmic Origins and the Coming of the Prime Evils. To understand the darkness that consumed Tristram, we must first journey back to the very beginning of existence itself. According to the ancient texts studied by scholars like Deckard Cain, long before mortals walked the earth, before kingdoms rose and fell, there existed only Anu, the first being, the singular consciousness that contained all of creation within itself. As the legend tells us, Anu was perfection, but perfection is static, unchanging. After eons of contemplation, Anu made a choice that would define the cosmos forever. He cast out all the evil within himself, all the darkness and chaos, creating from these expelled forces a second being of terrible power. Tathamet, the seven-headed dragon of pure malevolence. These two primordial forces, light and dark, order and chaos, fought for countless eons in a battle that shook the very foundations of reality. Neither could claim victory, for they were perfectly matched, two halves of the same whole locked in eternal conflict. In the end, they struck each other down simultaneously, their deaths creating what we might call the cosmic equivalent of the Big Bang. From Anu's spine rose the crystal arch, the foundation of the high heavens, where beings of pure light and sound, the angels, would emerge to carry on his legacy of order. From Tathamet's death, throes came the burning hells, where seven great evils would rule over countless demons in realms of eternal torment. The seven heads of Tathamet became these great evils, the three strongest heads forming the prime evils: Diablo, the Lord of Terror, Mephisto, the Lord of Hatred, and Baal, the Lord of Destruction. The four lesser heads became the lesser evils: Andariel, Duriel, Asmodan, and Belial. Between these two extremes, in the space where their essences mingled and fought, lay Pandemonium, a realm of constant warfare where angels and demons would clash for all eternity. And at the heart of Pandemonium rested the Eye of Anu, what mortals would come to know as the World Stone, the most powerful artifact in all creation. This war between heaven and hell, this eternal conflict, raged without pause or mercy. Angels fell by the thousands, demons were slaughtered without end, and neither side could claim lasting victory. It was perfect balance, perfect futility, perfect horror. The world of Sanctuary, our world, exists as a third realm caught between these cosmic forces. How exactly it came to be is a matter of scholarly debate, with different accounts providing varying details. What we know for certain is that humanity found itself in the middle of this cosmic struggle, possessing souls that could choose between light and darkness, order and chaos. But before humanity could choose its own destiny, a great upheaval occurred in hell itself. The three prime evils had ruled the burning hells since the death of Tathamet, commanding the lesser demons and directing hell's war against heaven. However, their younger siblings, the four lesser evils, had grown jealous of their brother's dominance and suspicious of their methods. In an event known as the Dark Exile, these four lesser evils combined their power and banished the three prime evils from hell itself, casting their spirits into the mortal realm of Sanctuary. This was no act of random rebellion. The lesser evils had grown suspicious of their elder brother's fascination with humanity and their plans for the mortal realm. Cast into the world of mortals, the three prime evils found themselves weakened but not defeated. Free from the confines of hell, they began to work their influence upon humanity, seeking to corrupt entire civilizations and build armies of mortal followers. The the very presence of such powerful demonic entities began to corrupt the lands they touched, creating monsters and horrors that had never before existed. It was during this time that humanity faced its first great test. Would they succumb to the influence of these ancient evils, or would they find the strength to resist? The answer would come from an unexpected source: the angels themselves. Chapter 2: The Haradrim and the Binding of the Prime Evils. The presence of the three prime evils in Sanctuary did not go unnoticed by the high heavens. As their corruption spread across the mortal realm, creating chaos and turning human against human, the Angiris Council, the ruling body of the angels, convened to discuss what action to take. Many angels argued for direct intervention, for an angelic host to descend upon Sanctuary and purge it of demonic influence once and for all. But Teriel, the Archangel of Justice, proposed a different path. He believed that humanity deserved the chance to prove itself, to choose their own destiny without angelic interference. More importantly, he understood that direct angelic intervention might provoke a response from hell that could escalate the eternal conflict beyond all previous bounds. Instead, Teriel chose to work through mortal agents, empowering humanity to face the threat themselves. He descended to Sanctuary in secret and sought out the most powerful mages and scholars among mankind. These individuals, drawn from various cultures and traditions across the world, would become known as the Haradrim, the guardians of humanity's future. To lead this brotherhood, Teriel chose Tal Rasha, a powerful mage from the eastern lands, whose wisdom and dedication to the protection of innocent life had earned him a reputation as one of the greatest heroes of his age. Alongside Tal Rasha came other legendary figures: Jared Kane, ancestor of the famous scholar Deckard Kane, whose descendants would carry on the Haradrim's knowledge for generations to come. But knowledge alone would not be enough to face the prime evils. Teriel provided the Horadrim with 3 artifacts of immense power: the Soul Stones. These crystalline objects had been forged in the heart of heaven itself, imbued with angelic power specifically designed to contain and imprison demonic essence. Each Soul Stone was attuned to one of the prime evils, capable of trapping their essence and preventing them from taking physical form. The creation of these Soul Stones was not without controversy in the high heavens. Many angels viewed the very idea of containing evil rather than destroying it as fundamentally flawed. They argued that such imprisonment could never be permanent, that evil would always find a way to escape and return stronger than before. But Teriel insisted that the prime evils could not truly be destroyed while the burning hells existed to give them form, and that imprisonment was the only viable solution. Armed with these divine artifacts, and blessed with Teriel's guidance, the Haradrim set out on their sacred mission. For decades, they pursued the prime evils across the length and breadth of Sanctuary, facing challenges that would have broken lesser mortals. They battled through armies of corrupted humans, faced down demons of incredible power, and endured hardships that tested the very limits of human endurance. The first to fall was Mephisto, the Lord of Hatred. The Haradrim tracked him to the jungles of Kegistan, where he had corrupted the Zakarum faith, originally a religion dedicated to the light, into a tool for spreading his influence. Mephisto had possessed the body of the Quahagan, the spiritual leader of the Zakarum, and through him had begun converting the entire priesthood to his cause. The battle to capture Mephisto was fierce and costly. Many Haradrim gave their lives in the assault on the corrupted temple where the Lord of Hatred had made his stronghold, but in the end, they succeeded in binding his essence within the prepared soulstone. However, they discovered to their horror that Mephisto's corruption had spread so deeply into the Zakarum faith that they could not trust the local population to guard his prison. Instead, the Haradrim were forced to leave the soulstone in the care of the Zakarum themselves, hoping that some small core of faithful priests remained uncorrupted. This decision would prove to have terrible consequences in years to come, as Mephisto's influence slowly worked its way out from his prison, corrupting generation after generation of Zakharum priests until the entire religion became an unwitting tool of evil. Next to fall was Baal, the Lord of Destruction. Of all the prime evils, Baal was perhaps the most cunning, the most capable of long-term planning and manipulation. The Haradrim pursued him across the northern wastes, through frozen lands, where his influence had created monsters of ice and fury. When they finally cornered him in the ancient city that would later be known as the barbarian homeland, the battle was unlike anything they had faced before. Baal fought with the desperation of a being that understood exactly what fate awaited him. The very landscape around the battle was transformed by his power. Mountains split open to reveal rivers of magma. The sky itself seemed to crack and bleed. In the end, the Haradrim prevailed, but at a terrible cost. As they prepared to bind Baal within his designated soulstone, disaster struck. The artifact had been damaged during the battle. Cracked by the incredible forces unleashed in the fight, it could still contain Baal's essence, but it could not do so safely. Any attempt to use the damaged Soul Stone would result in its eventual failure and the Lord of Destruction's escape. Faced with this crisis, Tal Rasha made the ultimate sacrifice. He volunteered to serve as an additional prison for Baal, to have the damaged Soul Stone driven into his own chest so that his mortal form could serve as a secondary containment. The other Haradrim protested, knowing that this would doom their leader to an eternity of torment as he struggled to contain Baal's essence within his own body. But Tal Rasha was resolute. He understood that this was the only way to ensure Baal's imprisonment would hold. In a ceremony that tested the faith of every Haradrim present, the cracked soulstone was driven into Tal Rasha's chest, binding both the Lord of Destruction and the greatest of the Haradrim in an eternal prison of flesh and stone. Tal Rasha was then entombed in a secret chamber deep beneath the desert sands, bound by chains forged with angelic blessing and protected by wards that would endure for centuries. The location of his tomb was known only to the highest-ranking Haradrim, its secret passed down through generations of guardians who would rather die than reveal its location. With two of the prime evils captured, only Diablo remained free. But the Lord of Terror had learned from his brother's defeats, had seen how the Haradrim's tactics worked, and had prepared accordingly. When the remaining members of the Brotherhood finally tracked him to the lands of Kandurus in the far west, they found him far more elusive than his siblings had been. Diablo led the Haradrim on a chase across the length of the kingdom, always staying one step ahead of their pursuit, using his mastery of fear and terror to turn the local population against the foreign mages who hunted him. Villagers that had welcomed the Haradrim became suddenly hostile. Nobles who had pledged their support found themselves plagued by nightmares that changed their minds overnight. For months, the hunt continued, with Diablo seeming to gain strength even as the Haradrim grew weaker. Many of the Brotherhood fell during this pursuit, some to demons, others to the corrupted humans that Diablo turned against them. The survivors began to doubt whether they could succeed where so many had already failed. But Diablo's greatest strength would prove to be his weakness. His need to feed on terror and fear required him to stay close to populated areas, to maintain his influence over the local population. This limited his options for hiding places and ultimately led to his downfall. The Haradrim managed to corner him near the town of Tristram, in the ruins of an ancient monastery that had been abandoned for centuries. The final battle between Diablo and the Haradrim was a clash of wills as much as magic. The Lord of Terror sought to break their spirits with visions of their worst fears, showing them the deaths of their friends, the corruption of their loved ones, the ultimate futility of their quest. But the surviving Haradrim had come too far and sacrificed too much to be turned aside by mere terror. In the end, they succeeded in binding Diablo within his soulstone, but the victory came at a price that nearly broke them. Of the mighty brotherhood that had once numbered in the hundreds, only a handful survived to see the Lord of Terror imprisoned. These survivors took Diablo's soulstone and buried it deep beneath the monastery where they had captured him, sealing it with all the protective wards and binding spells they could muster. Over the site of Diablo's prison, they built a great cathedral, both to honor their fallen comrades and to serve as a permanent fortress against the evil that lay beneath. Generations of priests and knights were charged with maintaining the vigil, with ensuring that the Lord of Terror never again walked free upon the earth. For 2 centuries, the system worked. The cathedral stood strong, its guardians faithful, the wards holding firm. The Haradrim brotherhood slowly disbanded as the immediate threat passed, its members returning to their homelands or founding new orders dedicated to preserving their knowledge. The location of the prime evil's prisons became legend, then myth, then almost forgotten history. But time has a way of eroding even the strongest foundations, and the evil that lay buried beneath Tristram was patient, cunning, and eternally determined to be free. Chapter 3. The coming of King Leoric and the seeds of corruption. As the 13th century drew to a close, the kingdom of Kandurus found itself in a state of uncertainty. The land had been without a proper king for years, ruled instead by a collection of feuding nobles who spent more time fighting each other than governing their people. Trade suffered, banditry flourished, and the common folk longed for strong leadership that could bring order to the chaos. It was during this period of instability that a ship arrived at Kandurus' shores, bearing passengers who would forever change the kingdom's fate. Aboard were nobles from the far eastern lands of Kyrgyzstan, members of the Zakharum faith, who had been sent west on what they claimed was a divine mission to bring order to the lawless frontier. At the head of this delegation was a man named Leoric, a lord of noble bearing and unquestionable piety. Tall and proud, with a voice that commanded respect and a presence that spoke of natural authority, Leoric seemed to embody everything that Kandurus needed in a leader. He came with knights and priests, with gold and promises of prosperity, and most importantly, with the backing of the powerful Zakharum church. Accompanying Leoric was his most trusted advisor, Archbishop Lazarus. Where Leoric was open and forthright, Lazarus was subtle and calculating. A man of great learning and apparent devotion, he served as both spiritual guide and political counselor to the future king. Few suspected that beneath his pious exterior lay a heart already touched by darkness, already beginning to turn toward shadows that normal men could not see. The delegation also included Leoric's family, his beloved wife Queen Asilla, whose gentle nature and genuine care for the common people quickly won hearts throughout the kingdom, and their 2 young sons. Prince Aidan, the elder, was a boy on the cusp of manhood, already showing signs of the noble character and warrior spirit that would one day make him a hero. Prince Albrecht, the younger, was still a child, bright and curious, beloved by all who knew him for his quick wit and kind heart. The circumstances of Leoric's rise to the throne of Kandurus were remarkably smooth, almost suspiciously so. The fractious nobles who had resisted unification for years suddenly found themselves in agreement that this eastern lord should be their king. Old feuds were set aside, ancient grievances forgotten, as if a great calm had settled over the land's leadership. What the people of Kandurus did not know was that this remarkable consensus was not entirely natural. Archbishop Lazarus had been busy during their journey west, using his considerable political skills and the backing of the Zakharum church to arrange matters to his satisfaction. Letters had been written, bribes paid, and promises made to ensure that Leoric's claim to the throne would be accepted without bloodshed. But Lazarus's motivations were not entirely pure. Unbeknownst to his trusting lord, the archbishop had been one of the guardians of Mephisto's prison in the temples of Kurast. For years he had stood watch over the Lord of Hatred's soulstone, believing himself strong enough to resist its influence. But Mephisto was patient and cunning, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, his whispers had begun to worm their way into Lazarus's mind. The corruption had been subtle at first: small doubts about the Zacharum leadership, minor disagreements with church policy, a growing sense that the current order was flawed and needed change. Lazarus had attributed these feelings to wisdom gained through experience, to a natural evolution of his understanding of the world. He had no idea that each doubt was carefully planted, each dissatisfaction deliberately cultivated by the Lord of Hatred himself. When the opportunity arose to accompany Lord Leoric on his mission to Honduras, Lazarus had volunteered eagerly. He told himself that he was serving the greater good, spreading the Zacharum faith to lands that needed guidance. In truth, he was fleeing from questions about his growing insubordination to the church hierarchy, concerns that had begun to reach even the highest levels of the Zacharum priesthood. Mephisto's influence over Lazarus was not yet complete, but it was strong enough to guide the Archbishop's choices without his knowledge. When Lazarus advised Leoric on where to establish his capital, he suggested the ancient monastery near the small town of Tristram. The building was certainly impressive, a massive stone structure that spoke of ancient power and enduring strength. More practically, it was centrally located and could easily be fortified against any threats. What Lazarus did not consciously realize, though some buried part of him might have suspected, was that he had been drawn to this place by forces beyond his understanding. The monastery was no random choice. It was the very cathedral that the Haradrim had built over Diablo's prison, the holy ground that had kept the Lord of Terror bound for over 2 centuries. Leoric embraced his new role with the enthusiasm of a man born to rule. He proved to be everything his supporters had hoped for: just but firm, wise but decisive, equally at home on the battlefield and in the council chamber. Under his leadership, Honduras began to flourish as it had not done in generations. Trade routes were secured, justice was administered fairly, and the common people found themselves prospering under their new king's rule. The royal family settled into their new home with apparent contentment. Queen Asilla threw herself into charitable works, establishing hospitals and schools throughout the kingdom. Prince Aidan began his training as a knight, studying under the finest masters that Leoric could provide. Young Prince Albrecht delighted in exploring his new home, running through the ancient halls and chambers of the monastery with the boundless energy of youth. For 5 years, this golden age continued. Honduras became known throughout the Western lands as a kingdom of justice and prosperity, ruled by a king whose wisdom was matched only by his devotion to his people. Visitors came from distant lands to seek audience with Leoric, to learn from his methods of governance, to bask in the reflected glory of his success. But beneath this surface prosperity, dark forces were beginning to stir. The ancient wards that had kept Diablo imprisoned were slowly weakening, eroded by time and the constant pressure of the demon's will pressing against them. The Lord of Terror had not been idle during his centuries of imprisonment. He had been learning, growing stronger, preparing for the day when he could once again walk free. The first signs of trouble were subtle, so minor that they passed almost unnoticed. Servants began to report strange dreams, nightmares that seemed unusually vivid and disturbing. Guards on night duty spoke of shadows that moved without light to cast them, of whispers in empty corridors, of a general sense of unease that seemed to permeate the very stones of the monastery. Archbishop Lazarus was among the first to notice these disturbances, and his reaction was telling. Rather than investigating these phenomena or reporting them to his king, he found himself drawn to explore them further. Late at night, when the rest of the royal household slept, Lazarus would walk the deepest corridors of the monastery, following whispers that only he could hear, searching for something he could not name. It was during one of these midnight wanderings that Lazarus discovered the entrance to the ancient catacombs beneath the cathedral. Hidden behind a wall that had been sealed for centuries, the passage beckoned to him with an irresistible allure. Using his authority as Archbishop, Lazarus ordered the wall broken down, claiming that he needed to investigate the monastery's foundations for structural repairs. What he found beneath the cathedral would have driven a normal man to madness or death. The catacombs were a labyrinth of ancient stone corridors filled with the tombs of long-dead Haradrim and protected by wards that sparked and crackled with residual angelic power. At the heart of this underground maze lay a chamber that pulsed with malevolent energy, where a single stone pedestal held an object that seemed to drink in light itself. The soul stone containing Diablo's essence was a thing of terrible beauty, a crystal artifact that seemed to contain swirling darkness shot through with veins of pulsing red light. Even weakened by centuries of imprisonment, the Lord of Terror's presence was overwhelming, a psychic weight that pressed down on any mortal who came too close. For Lazarus, already partially corrupted by Mephisto's influence, the Soul Stone's effect was not repulsion, but attraction. He found himself drawn to the artifact like a moth to flame, unable to resist the whispered promises that seemed to emanate from within the crystal. Here was power beyond imagination, knowledge beyond mortal understanding, the chance to reshape the world according to his vision. The corruption of Lazarus was completed in that underground chamber, as Diablo's will merged with Mephisto's earlier influence to create a servant devoted to evil beyond redemption. But the Lord of Terror was too cunning to act immediately. Instead, he began to work slowly, subtly, using Lazarus as his agent, while laying the groundwork for his eventual freedom. The first phase of Diablo's plan involved breaking free from his Soulstone prison, but the artifact had been created by angels and bound with Haradrim magic. It could not simply be shattered by brute force. Instead, Diablo needed a willing agent, someone who would consciously choose to free him from his bonds. In Lazarus, he found exactly what he needed. Under Diablo's guidance, Lazarus began to study the ancient texts left behind by the Haradrim, learning the rituals and procedures they had used to bind the Lord of Terror. With this knowledge, he was able to reverse their work, slowly and carefully weakening the bonds that held Diablo's essence within the Soulstone. But even as his prison began to crack, Diablo remained cautious. His previous defeat had taught him the dangers of acting too openly, too quickly. This time, he would work from the shadows, building his power base carefully before revealing himself to the world. And for this, he would need a mortal host, a body through which he could act in the physical world while remaining hidden from potential enemies. His first choice was obvious: King Leoric himself. The man who ruled Honduras would make an ideal puppet, his authority and influence providing the perfect cover for Diablo's activities. Slowly, carefully, the Lord of Terror began to extend his influence upward from the catacombs, sending tendrils of his power into the minds of those who dwelt above. King Leoric began to experience strange dreams, visions that seemed to come from beyond the boundaries of normal sleep. At first, these were pleasant fantasies, images of Honduras growing into a mighty empire, of his sons becoming great heroes, of his dynasty lasting for 1,000 years. But gradually, the dreams began to take on darker overtones, suggestions that such greatness could only be achieved through strength, through the willingness to do whatever was necessary to protect and expand his power. The changes in Leoric were subtle at first, so gradual that even those closest to him barely noticed. The king who had once been quick to show mercy became more stern in his judgments. The ruler who had preferred negotiation to warfare began to speak more often of the need for military strength. The man who had trusted his advisors began to rely more and more heavily on Archbishop Lazarus, whose counsel always seemed to align with these new, darker impulses. But Leoric was stronger than Diablo had anticipated. The king's will, forged by years of just rule and genuine love for his people, proved remarkably resistant to the Lord of Terror's influence. Where Mephisto had easily corrupted the Zacharum priesthood and Baal had found willing servants among the power-hungry, Diablo found in Leoric a mind that fought back against every attempt at domination. For 5 years, this hidden war raged in the depths of Leoric's soul. The king fought against influences he could not understand, struggling to remain true to the principles that had made him a great ruler. Sometimes he succeeded, making decisions that frustrated Diablo's plans and protected his kingdom from the worst effects of the Lord of Terror's influence. But slowly, inevitably, the constant pressure began to take its toll. The first visible signs of Leoric's mental deterioration appeared in his 6th year of rule. His mood became increasingly erratic, swinging from periods of his old wisdom and kindness to episodes of paranoid suspicion. He began to see threats where none existed, to question the loyalty of advisors who had served him faithfully for years. Queen Asilla was among the first to notice the changes in her husband, and her attempts to help him only made matters worse. Diablo seized upon Leoric's growing paranoia, whispering suggestions that his wife was working against him, that her concern was actually evidence of treachery. The loving marriage that had been one of the kingdom's greatest strengths began to crack under the pressure of supernatural manipulation. Prince Aidan, now a young man and a skilled warrior in his own right, also began to see the changes in his father. But where his mother tried to reach Leoric through love and gentle persuasion, Aidan attempted to confront the problem directly. This only served to inflame the king's paranoia further, as Diablo convinced him that his own son was plotting against him. Only young Prince Albrecht seemed immune to the growing tension in the royal household. Still a child, he moved through the darkening halls of the monastery with the resilience of youth, somehow managing to bring smiles to faces that had grown grim with worry. Perhaps it was this very innocence that drew Diablo's attention to him, made the Lord of Terror begin to consider him as an alternative to his increasingly resistant father. Archbishop Lazarus, meanwhile, continued to serve as Diablo's primary agent in the world above. His influence over the king grew stronger as Leoric's mental state deteriorated, and he used this influence to isolate his master from potential sources of help. Trusted advisors found themselves reassigned to distant posts. Loyal knights were sent on long missions that took them far from court, and anyone who questioned the archbishop's growing authority was quietly removed from positions of influence. The corruption spreading through the monastery was not limited to its human inhabitants. The very stones of the ancient building began to change, becoming somehow darker and more oppressive. Servants reported that shadows seemed deeper than they should be, that certain corridors remained cold even in the height of summer, that the sound of footsteps sometimes echoed from empty chambers. Strange creatures began to appear in the deepest parts of the monastery, things that skittered in the darkness and left claw marks on stone walls. The royal guards attributed these to rats or other vermin, unaware that they were looking at the first signs of hell itself beginning to seep into the mortal world. As Leoric's resistance to Diablo's influence slowly crumbled, the Lord of Terror prepared for the next phase of his plan. He had learned patience during his long imprisonment, had come to understand that true victory required careful preparation and precise timing. Soon, very soon, he would be ready to act. But first, he needed to remove the last obstacles to his freedom, and that meant dealing with those members of the royal household who might interfere with his plans. The stage was set for a tragedy that would consume not just the royal family, but the entire kingdom of Kandorus. The darkness that had been building beneath Tristram for years was about to burst forth with devastating consequences, and nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 4: The Fall of House. Leoric and the Rise of Terror. The final collapse of King Leoric's sanity did not come all at once, but rather like the slow crumbling of a mighty dam, with small cracks gradually widening until the entire structure could no longer hold back the dark waters behind it. By the 7th year of his reign, the transformation from beloved ruler to tyrant was nearly complete. though few yet understood the supernatural forces driving this terrible change. The breaking point came when Diablo finally abandoned his attempts to fully possess the king. After years of struggle, the Lord of Terror realized that Leoric's will would never be completely broken, that some core of nobility and strength in the man's character would always resist total domination. Rather than continue this futile battle, Diablo decided to use Leoric's deteriorating mental state as a distraction while he pursued a different, more promising target. Archbishop Lazarus received his master's new instructions during one of his midnight communions in the depths of the catacombs. The plan was audacious in its cruelty. Rather than trying to possess the king, Diablo would take the king's youngest son as his host. Prince Albrecht, still young and innocent, would be far easier to dominate than his father. Moreover, the psychological impact of such an act would shatter any remaining resistance from the royal family and the kingdom's nobility. But the plan required careful timing and execution. Albrecht could not simply disappear. His absence would be noticed immediately, and a search would be mounted that might discover Diablo's involvement. Instead, Lazarus would need to create a situation where the prince's disappearance could be blamed on external enemies, preferably in a way that would further destabilize the kingdom and eliminate potential threats to Diablo's plans. The opportunity came when tensions began to rise between Kandurus and its neighboring kingdom of Westmarch. These two realms had maintained peaceful relations for decades, but Leoric's increasingly erratic behavior had begun to strain diplomatic ties. His demands for tribute from trade caravans, his hostile treatment of Westmarch ambassadors, and his aggressive military posturing had created genuine concern in the neighboring kingdom about his intentions. Lazarus carefully fanned these flames of suspicion, whispering in Leoric's ear about Westmarch plots and conspiracies, about the need to strike first before enemies could act against Kandurus. The king's paranoid delusions made him all too ready to believe such suggestions, especially when they seemed to confirm his own growing fears about threats to his realm. The final catalyst came when a Westmarch trade delegation arrived in Tristram for what should have been routine negotiations about border tariffs and trade routes. These merchants and diplomats had no idea that they were walking into a trap carefully orchestrated by supernatural evil. Lazarus had spent weeks preparing Leoric for this moment, filling his mind with fantasies about Westmarch spies and assassins, about secret armies massing on the border, about plots to overthrow his rightful rule. When the delegation presented their credentials and began to discuss terms for continued peaceful trade, Leoric saw only confirmation of his worst fears. Their very reasonableness seemed like mockery to his twisted perception, their diplomatic language sounding like barely concealed threats. In a fit of paranoid rage, he had the entire delegation arrested on charges of espionage and treason. The diplomatic crisis that followed provided Lazarus with exactly the cover he needed. As Westmarch demanded the release of their people, and Leoric ranted about foreign conspiracies, the Archbishop quietly suggested that decisive military action was needed. The king, now completely divorced from rational thought, declared war on Westmarch and ordered his armies to mobilize for what he called a preemptive strike against treachery. This decision horrified everyone in the royal court, who still retained their sanity. Sir Lachdanan, the captain of the royal guard and Leoric's most trusted knight, tried desperately to reason with his king. The veteran warrior pointed out that Westmarch was far more powerful than Kandurus, that such a war would be suicidal, that the diplomatic dispute could easily be resolved through negotiation. But Leoric, egged on by Lazarus's poisonous counsel, would hear none of it. "You dare question your king?" Leoric screamed at the man who had served him faithfully for years. "Perhaps you too are part of this conspiracy. Perhaps Westmarch gold has bought your loyalty as well." The accusations cut Lachdanan to the heart, but he remained loyal to his oath of service, even as he watched the man he had sworn to protect descend into madness. The military preparations for Leoric's impossible war provided the perfect distraction for Lazarus's true mission. As the kingdom's attention focused on mustering armies and gathering supplies, Few noticed the Archbishop's nocturnal activities in the depths of the monastery. Working with unholy ritual and demonic guidance, Lazarus continued to weaken the bonds that held Diablo's soulstone, preparing for the moment when his master would be ready to take physical form once again. The war began as badly as everyone except Leoric had predicted. The armies of Kandaras, though brave and well-trained, were vastly outnumbered by Westmarch's forces. What was supposed to be a quick victory became a series of devastating defeats as Kandaras's soldiers found themselves facing not just superior numbers, but also superior equipment and tactics. Prince Aidan, now old enough to serve as a knight, was among those sent to war. His departure from Tristram was heartbreaking for those who knew him. A young man of noble character forced to fight in a conflict he knew was unjust, serving a father whose madness had destroyed the kingdom's peace. As he rode away at the head of a column of knights, many wondered if they would ever see him alive again. With Aidan gone and the kingdom's military forces committed to their doomed campaign, Lazarus finally had the opportunity he had been waiting for. Late one night, as the monastery slept, he made his way to Prince Albrecht's chambers. The boy was sleeping peacefully, unaware that his innocence was about to be destroyed by forces beyond his comprehension. Using skills learned in his years of service to Mephisto, Lazarus cast a sleep spell that would keep the prince unconscious during his transport to the catacombs. He then carried the boy's limp form through the dark corridors of the monastery, down secret passages that led to the ancient Haradrim crypts beneath the cathedral. The ritual chamber where Diablo's soulstone waited had been prepared with meticulous care. Unholy symbols covered the walls, drawn in substances that would have sickened any normal person to identify. Candles made from rendered human fat cast a sickly light that seemed to make the shadows dance with malevolent life. At the center of it all, the soulstone pulsed with anticipation, its dark crystal surface reflecting light that came from no earthly source. When Prince Albrecht awoke, he found himself bound to a stone altar, surrounded by a nightmare that his young mind could barely process. Lazarus stood over him, no longer bothering to maintain his facade of pious service. The man who had been a trusted advisor to his father now revealed himself as something far more sinister, his eyes glowing with an inner fire that spoke of supernatural corruption. "Do not fear, young prince," Lazarus said in a voice that no longer sounded entirely human. "You are about to become part of something far greater than any mortal kingdom. Through you, my master will return to reclaim his rightful place in this world." The boy tried to scream, but Lazarus's magic held him paralyzed, able to see and hear, but unable to move or cry out. He could only watch in terror as the Archbishop began the ritual that would destroy his life and damn his soul. The process of binding Diablo's essence to a mortal host was not simple possession, but something far more invasive and permanent. Using techniques learned from ancient texts and guided by the Lord of Terror himself, Lazarus began to merge the soulstone's power with Albrecht's very being. The crystal was placed against the boy's forehead, its surface becoming scorching hot as it began to sink into his flesh. The pain was indescribable. As the soulstone penetrated his skull and touched his brain, Albrecht felt his mind being invaded by something vast and alien and utterly malevolent. Diablo's consciousness poured into him like molten metal, burning away his thoughts and memories, replacing his innocent soul with something that belonged in the deepest pits of hell. But unlike his attempts to possess King Leoric, this time Diablo encountered no resistance. A child's mind, especially one paralyzed by terror and pain, could not hope to fight against the Lord of Terror's will. Within moments, Prince Albrecht ceased to exist as anything more than a passenger in his own body, watching helplessly as his form was taken over by ancient evil. The physical transformation began almost immediately. Diablo's true form was that of a massive demon, far larger and more terrible than any human body could contain. But the Lord of Terror was skilled in the art of adaptation and he began to reshape Albrecht's flesh to better suit his needs. Bones stretched and thickened, muscles swelled with supernatural strength, and skin hardened into something approaching scales. Most horrifying of all were the changes to the boy's face. His eyes became pits of burning red light, windows into hell itself. Great horns erupted from his skull, growing larger each day as Diablo's transformation continued. His teeth became fangs capable of tearing through steel, and his voice became a thing of nightmares when he chose to speak. But Diablo was patient. He had waited centuries for this opportunity, and he would not waste it through hasty action. Instead of immediately revealing himself, he remained hidden in the depths of the catacombs, slowly building his power while his transformation of Albrecht's body continued. He had learned from his previous defeat that premature exposure led to organized resistance, and this time he would not make that mistake. Above ground, the disappearance of Prince Albrecht sent King Leoric into paroxysms of rage and despair. Already unbalanced by Diablo's influence and the stress of his failing war, the loss of his beloved youngest son pushed him over the edge into complete madness. He accused everyone in the court of complicity in the kidnapping, ordering the torture and execution of servants, guards, and nobles alike. Queen Asilla became a particular target of her husband's paranoid fury. In his twisted mind, her genuine grief over their son's disappearance became evidence of her guilt. "You weep for him because you know where he is," Leoric screamed at her during one of his increasingly frequent rages. "You have betrayed me and our son to my enemies." The accusations were so absurd that at first Asilla tried to reason with her husband, to remind him of their years of love and partnership. But Leoric's madness had progressed beyond the reach of reason or affection. In the end, driven by delusions and supernatural manipulation, he ordered his own wife's execution on charges of treason and child murder. The sight of their beloved queen being dragged to her death finally broke the spirit of many who had tried to remain loyal to their king. Servants fled the monastery in terror, soldiers deserted their posts, and even some of the nobles began to plot against the man who had once been their greatest hope for peace and prosperity. But it was Sir Lacdanan who finally took decisive action. The knight captain had watched in horror as his king descended into madness, had seen good people tortured and killed on the basis of paranoid delusions, had witnessed the execution of a queen whose only crime was loving her family. When news came from the war front that the armies of Kandurus had suffered yet another devastating defeat, Lacdanan realized that he could no longer serve a man who had become a monster. The confrontation between Lacdanan and Leoric was the stuff of tragedy. Here was a loyal knight forced to turn against the master he had sworn to serve, a man of honor compelled to commit regicide for the greater good of the kingdom. Lacdanan tried one last time to reach whatever remained of the man Leoric had once been, pleading with him to see reason, to remember his duty to his people. But the king who answered was no longer the noble ruler who had once brought peace to Kandurus. "You dare draw steel against your rightful king?" Leoric shrieked, raising his own sword with hands that shook with madness. "I know what you are. Another traitor, another conspirator. You will die for your treachery." The battle was brief but vicious. Though madness had weakened Leoric's body, supernatural rage gave him strength beyond mortal limits. But Lacdanan was the finest warrior in the kingdom, and his cause was just. In the end, it was mercy as much as skill that ended the fight. Lacdanan could have prolonged the battle, could have tried to subdue his king without killing him, but he could see that there was nothing left of the man he had once served. Death was the only release possible for a soul so thoroughly corrupted. As Leoric died, his final words were not repentance or regret, but a curse upon all who had betrayed him. With his last breath, he called down supernatural vengeance upon Lacdanan and all the knights who had stood by and allowed their king to be murdered. It was a curse that would have terrible consequences in the years to come, as the dead king's hatred proved strong enough to reach beyond the grave. Archbishop Lazarus, observing these events from the shadows, was pleased with how well his plans were proceeding. The royal family was destroyed, the kingdom was in chaos, and soon his master would be ready to emerge from the catacombs and claim dominion over this broken realm. But first, there was one more deception to arrange. One final act of treachery that would eliminate any remaining threats to Diablo's plans. With the monastery in chaos following Leoric's death, Lazarus emerged from the depths to address the surviving population of Tristram. Playing his role as the grieving archbishop, he spoke eloquently of the need to rescue Prince Albrecht from whatever dark forces had taken him. The boy was their last hope, he claimed, the rightful heir who could restore peace to their troubled land. "We must mount a rescue expedition," Lazarus declared to the assembled townspeople. "We must brave the catacombs beneath the cathedral and find our lost prince before it is too late. Who among you has the courage to save the child who will one day be your king?" The response was everything Lazarus had hoped for. Driven by genuine love for young Albrecht and desperate for hope in their darkest hour, many of Tristram's bravest citizens volunteered to join the rescue mission. Blacksmiths and farmers, shopkeepers and soldiers, all united in their determination to save their prince from whatever evil had taken him. Lazarus led this brave band into the catacombs, guiding them through passages he knew by heart from his midnight journeys. But this was no rescue mission. It was a massacre waiting to happen. For in the depths of the ancient crypts, Diablo had been busy creating servants from the raw material of his new domain. The first sign that something was wrong came when the rescue party encountered creatures that should not have existed in any natural world. Skeletons animated by malevolent will shambled through the corridors, their bones held together by supernatural hatred. Zombies that had once been men lurched from hidden alcoves, their rotting flesh animated by demonic power. But these undead horrors were nothing compared to what waited in the deeper levels of the catacombs. Here, Diablo's influence had grown strong enough to manifest demons from the burning hells themselves. Fallen angels twisted into mockeries of their former selves stalked the halls, while creatures of living flame and shadow hunted anything that dared to trespass in their domain. The townspeople, brave though they were, stood no chance against such supernatural opposition. Armed with farming tools and kitchen knives, protected by nothing more than leather aprons and woolen clothes, they were slaughtered without mercy. Their screams echoed through the stone corridors, providing a feast of terror that only made Diablo stronger. In the end, only a handful survived to stumble back to the surface, their minds shattered by what they had witnessed. One man, wounded and dying, managed to reach the entrance to the cathedral before collapsing. It was his testimony that first alerted the remaining population of Tristram to the true nature of the horror that had been unleashed beneath their feet. "The Butcher!" the dying man gasped, speaking of the creature that had led the massacre of his companions. "Ah, fresh meat," he whispered, repeating the monster's terrible greeting. These would be his last words, but they would not be forgotten by those who heard them. As word spread of the disaster in the catacombs, panic gripped the population of Tristram. Those who could flee did so, abandoning their homes and businesses in a desperate attempt to escape whatever evil had been awakened beneath the cathedral. But many remained, whether from stubbornness, duty, or simple inability to leave their lives behind. These survivors would become witnesses to the horror that followed, as the influence of Diablo's presence began to transform the very land around Tristram. The sun seemed dimmer during the day, the nights grew longer and filled with unnatural sounds. Animals began to behave strangely, becoming aggressive and predatory in ways that defied their nature. Plants withered and died, leaving the countryside around the town looking like a wasteland. But the worst was yet to come. Deep in the catacombs, Diablo's transformation of Prince Albrecht's body was nearing completion. Soon, the Lord of Terror would be ready to emerge from his underground lair and begin the next phase of his campaign to reclaim his place among the rulers of Hell. The stage was set for the events that would bring heroes to Tristram, heroes who would face the ultimate test of courage and determination in the depths of the cursed cathedral. Meanwhile, far from Tristram, Prince Aidan fought his own battles in the doomed war against Westmarch. The young warrior had distinguished himself in combat, proving that he had inherited his father's courage, even if he had been spared his madness. But news from home troubled him greatly. Reports of his mother's execution, his father's death, and his brother's disappearance reached him even on the distant battlefield. As the armies of Khandurus faced yet another defeat, Aidan made a decision that would change his life forever. He could not continue to fight in a war that served no purpose while his homeland burned and his family lay dead or missing. With a small group of loyal companions, warriors he had met during the campaign who shared his commitment to justice and honor, Aidan deserted the army and began the long journey home to Tristram. The group that rode toward the cursed town included two individuals who would prove crucial to the coming battle against evil. There was Morena, a warrior of the Sisterhood of the Sightless Eye, the Rogues, as they were commonly known. She was a master archer whose skills were matched only by her dedication to protecting the innocent from supernatural threats. Her order had been founded centuries earlier to combat exactly the kind of evil that now threatened Tristram. The second companion was Jazreth, a sorcerer of the Vizjare clan whose mastery of the elemental forces was legendary even among his magic-wielding peers. Unlike many of his kind, who studied magic for its own sake or for personal power, Jazreth believed that arcane knowledge should be used to protect humanity from the dark forces that threatened it. Together, these three heroes would face trials that would test not only their courage and skill, but their very humanity. For in the depths of the Tristram Cathedral, ancient evil waited with patience born of centuries, and the Lord of Terror was preparing to remind the world why even demons feared to speak his name. Chapter 5. The Heroes Descend into the Heart of Darkness. The town of Tristram that greeted the three heroes bore little resemblance to the prosperous settlement they remembered from years past. Where once there had been bustling markets and cheerful taverns, now there stood a community gripped by fear and desperation. The remaining inhabitants moved like ghosts through streets that seemed perpetually shrouded in shadow, their faces marked by the hollow-eyed stare of people who had seen too much horror. It should be noted that while the original game allowed players to choose between three character classes, the warrior, the rogue, and the sorcerer, their specific identities and backgrounds would be expanded and modified in later games. For the purposes of this telling, we follow the commonly accepted interpretation that emerged from subsequent lore. The heroes who had come to investigate the darkness plaguing Tristram represented the three archetypal defenders of humanity. The warrior was a skilled fighter, well-versed in the arts of combat, and armored in the finest steel that mortal smiths could forge. The rogue was a master archer, trained in the ancient traditions of the Sisterhood of the Sightless Eye, whose members had long stood guard against supernatural threats. The sorcerer was a wielder of arcane forces, educated in the schools of magic that had preserved knowledge from the time of the Haradrim themselves. Together, these three champions would face trials that would test not only their courage and skill, but their very humanity. For in the depths of the Tristram Cathedral, ancient evil waited with patience born of centuries, and the Lord of Terror was preparing to remind the world why even demons feared to speak his name. The first person to greet them was Deckard Cain, the elderly scholar who served as the town's de facto leader in the absence of any other authority. Cain was a man who carried the weight of ancient knowledge, the last descendant of the Horadrim brotherhood that had once bound the prime evils. Though the organization had long since disbanded and most of its secrets had been lost to time, Cain retained enough understanding of demonology and ancient history to comprehend the true scope of the threat they faced. The old scholar led them to the tavern, one of the few buildings in Tristram that still maintained some semblance of normalcy. There, by the light of flickering candles, Cain recounted the events that had led to the town's current state of terror. He spoke of King Leoric's descent into madness, of Prince Albrecht's mysterious disappearance, of Archbishop Lazarus's rescue mission that had ended in massacre. But it was when Cain revealed his suspicions about the true nature of the threat that the conversation took on a truly ominous tone. As one of the few scholars still versed in the ancient lore, he had begun to piece together the signs and portents that pointed to a truth almost too terrible to comprehend. The heroes learned that what lay beneath their cathedral was no mere infestation of monsters, but one of the prime evils themselves, Diablo, the Lord of Terror. Other survivors of the town added their own pieces to the horrific puzzle. They spoke of the strange changes that had come over King Leoric, of illnesses that defied all treatment, of wounds that would not heal. Most disturbing of all was the testimony of those few who had survived encounters with the creatures emerging from the cathedral depths. The heroes spent several days preparing for their descent into the cathedral. The town's blacksmith worked tirelessly to forge and repair their equipment, creating weapons and armor capable of withstanding supernatural assault. The healer prepared potions and antidotes for ailments that no earthly physician had ever encountered. Adria, a witch who lived on the outskirts of town, provided magical supplies and enchantments drawn from knowledge that predated many organized faiths. Deckard Cain proved invaluable in helping them understand what they would face below. Though much of the Haradrim's knowledge had been lost over the centuries, he retained enough understanding of demonology to brief them on the types of creatures they were likely to encounter. More importantly, he was able to provide them with blessed weapons and protective wards that might prove effective against demonic opponents. The entrance to the cathedral's depths lay behind the main altar, where a stone staircase descended into darkness that seemed to swallow torchlight. Ancient Haradrim sigils carved into the walls flickered with residual power, their protective magic weakened by time, but not entirely extinguished. As the three heroes crossed the threshold, they felt a tangible change in the air, a heaviness that seemed to press down on their spirits, a wrongness that made their skin crawl with supernatural dread. The first level of the cathedral proved to be a maze of stone corridors and chamber rooms that had once housed the monastery's priests and monks. But the holy ground had been thoroughly corrupted by years of Diablo's influence. Religious artifacts had been twisted into blasphemous shapes, holy texts had been rewritten in languages that hurt to read, and everywhere there were signs of the violence that had consumed the building's former inhabitants. The undead that stalked these halls were not random monsters, but the reanimated corpses of the cathedral's former guardians. Priests who had once blessed the faithful now shambled through the corridors with unholy light burning in their empty eye sockets. Knights who had sworn to protect the innocent had become armored skeletons, wielding weapons that dripped with supernatural poison. The psychological impact of fighting these corrupted defenders was almost as challenging as the physical combat itself. These were not faceless monsters, but the remains of good people who had been corrupted by forces beyond their control. Every battle forced the heroes to destroy what had once been someone's friend, colleague, or loved one. But there was no mercy to be found in hesitation. The undead retained none of their former personalities or motivations. They were driven only by an overwhelming compulsion to destroy any living being that dared to trespass in their domain. Their attacks came without warning or pause, and their supernatural resilience meant that they could continue fighting even after suffering wounds that would have killed a living opponent instantly. The first major challenge came when the heroes encountered the creature known as the Butcher. This massive demon had been the one responsible for the massacre of Lazarus's rescue mission, and it had since made its lair in what had once been the cathedral's kitchen. The sight that greeted them when they opened the door to its chamber was one that would haunt their nightmares for years to come. Bodies hung from meat hooks like sides of beef, their flesh carved away with the precision of a skilled butcher. Blood covered every surface in the room, so thick that it squelched underfoot as they moved, and in the center of this charnel house stood the butcher itself, a demon of such grotesque proportions that it seemed impossible for any earthly space to contain it. "Ah, fresh meat!" the creature rumbled as it turned to face them, its voice carrying harmonics that seemed to bypass the ears and strike directly at the primal fear centers of the brain. The massive cleaver in its hands dripped with the blood of its latest victims, and its eyes burned with a hunger that went far beyond mere appetite for flesh. The battle that followed was brutal and desperate. The butcher's strength was immense, its cleaver capable of splitting stone with each swing. Worse still, it seemed to grow stronger as the fight progressed, feeding on the fear and pain of its opponents. Aiden's swordwork, formidable though it was, could barely penetrate the creature's hide. Morena's arrows found their mark, but seemed to cause only minor inconvenience to the massive demon. It was Jazreth's magic that finally turned the tide. Drawing upon reserves of power that he had been carefully conserving, the sorcerer unleashed a barrage of elemental attacks that forced the butcher back against the far wall of its lair. Lightning crackled around the demon's form, fire seared its flesh, and ice began to form around its massive limbs, slowing its movements just enough for his companions to press their attack. In the end, it was teamwork that defeated the creature. While Jazreth's spells held it in place, and Morena's arrows found the weak points in its armor, Aiden managed to drive his blade deep into the butcher's heart. The demon's death scream shattered stone throughout the chamber, and its corpse dissolved into shadow and sulfur, leaving behind only its massive cleaver as proof that the battle had been real. But victory came at a cost. All three heroes had been wounded in the fight, and they had consumed a significant portion of their magical and physical resources. Worse still, this was only the first level of the cathedral, and they could sense that greater horrors awaited them in the depths below. As they pressed deeper into the cathedral, the heroes began to understand the true scope of Diablo's corruption. Each level they descended was worse than the last, filled with more powerful demons and more dangerous traps. The very architecture of the building seemed to shift and change around them, as if the Lord of Terror's presence was rewriting reality itself to suit his malevolent purposes. On the second level, they encountered the Skeleton King, the reanimated corpse of King Leoric himself, transformed by death and supernatural hatred into an undead monarch ruling over an army of skeletal warriors. The sight of his father's corrupted remains nearly broke Aiden's resolve, but the prince forced himself to remember that the man he had loved was already dead. What stood before him now was merely a mockery wearing his father's form. The battle against the Skeleton King was as much a test of will as of martial skill. The undead monarch retained all of his legendary prowess with sword and shield, enhanced by supernatural strength and immunity to fatigue or pain. More challenging still was his ability to command the lesser undead throughout the level, calling reinforcements to his aid whenever the battle seemed to turn against him. The Skeleton King's defeat came when the heroes managed to shatter the crown that channeled his undead power, disrupting the magical energies that held his form together. As the crown crumbled to dust, so too did the bones that had once been King Leoric, finally allowing the tormented spirit to find the peace that had been denied to him in undeath. The third and fourth levels of the cathedral brought them into the ancient catacombs that predated the building above. Here, the Horadrim had buried their dead alongside the artifacts and treasures they had accumulated during their war against the prime evils. The very walls seemed to pulse with residual magical energy, creating an atmosphere of otherworldly dread that pressed down on the heroes like a physical weight. New types of enemies appeared on these levels. Demons that commanded dark magic, undead sorcerers who hurled bolts of necrotic energy, and creatures that seemed to be composed entirely of living shadow. The battles grew more complex and dangerous, requiring the heroes to adapt their tactics constantly as they faced opponents unlike anything they had previously encountered. It was on the 4th level that they finally encountered Archbishop Lazarus himself, or what he had become under Diablo's influence. The man who had once been King Leoric's trusted advisor now stood revealed as a creature of pure corruption, his human form twisted into something that belonged in the deepest pits of hell. But Lazarus was not alone. The chamber where they found him was filled with succubi and other demons, all of them eager to tear apart any mortals foolish enough to challenge their master's authority. Worse still, the Archbishop had been expecting them, had prepared traps and ambushes designed to exploit their growing exhaustion. "You are too late," Lazarus taunted them as the battle began. "The child is mine now, his innocent soul consumed by my master's glory. Soon, Diablo will emerge from his cocoon of flesh, and this world will burn in the fires of his righteous wrath." The fight against Lazarus and his demonic minions was the most challenging battle the heroes had yet faced. The Archbishop commanded magic that could twist reality itself, creating illusions that made it impossible to distinguish friend from foe, opening portals that allowed demons to attack from unexpected angles, and wielding destructive spells that could reduce stone to powder. But it was the psychological warfare that proved most difficult to overcome. Lazarus had been present during Prince Albrecht's corruption, had witnessed the boy's transformation into something unspeakable. With sadistic pleasure, he described these events in graphic detail, painting verbal pictures designed to break Aiden's spirit and drive him to despair. "He screamed for you, you know," the Archbishop hissed as his demons pressed their attack. "Called out for his big brother to save him as my master's essence poured into his mind. But where were you? Playing soldier in a foreign land while your family needed you most. Perhaps if you had been a better brother, a better son, none of this would have happened." These words cut deeper than any physical weapon, but they also kindled a rage in Aiden's heart that burned away all doubt and hesitation. This creature had destroyed his family, had corrupted his innocent brother, had turned his home into a nightmare of horror and despair. Whatever the cost, whatever the sacrifice required, Lazarus would pay for his crimes. The Archbishop's downfall came when Jazreth managed to dispel the illusions that had been protecting him, revealing his true location to his opponents. Morena's arrows found their mark, disrupting his spellcasting long enough for Aiden to close the distance between them. The prince's blade, blessed by Deckard Cain and imbued with all the righteous fury of a brother's love, pierced through Lazarus's supernatural defenses and found his corrupted heart. As the Archbishop died, his final words were a prophecy of doom. "It matters not. My master's work is complete. The Lord of Terror rises, and you will be the first to kneel before his throne." But even with Lazarus dead, the hero's quest was far from over. The entrance to the lowest level of the cathedral, to hell itself as it had become under Diablo's influence, lay before them. Beyond that final threshold waited the ultimate confrontation, the battle that would determine not just the fate of Tristram, but potentially the future of all humanity. As they stood before the portal that led to Diablo's domain, each of the three heroes understood that they might not survive what lay ahead. The air itself seemed to vibrate with malevolent energy, and the very stones around the entrance bore scorch marks that suggested the barrier between hell and the mortal realm had grown perilously thin. The final descent took them beyond the boundaries of the physical world into a realm where the laws of nature held no sway. Here, in the deepest level of what had once been a holy cathedral, hell itself had begun to seep into reality. The corridors were carved from black stone that seemed to absorb light, lit only by rivers of lava that flowed along channels carved into the floor. The air shimmered with heat that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the presence of absolute evil. This was Diablo's throne room, his seat of power in the mortal realm. The chamber stretched far beyond what the cathedral's original dimensions should have allowed, its ceiling lost in shadows that seemed to move with their own volition. Pillars of twisted metal and bone-supported arches, decorated with the writhing forms of tortured souls, while the floor was inlaid with symbols that hurt to look at directly. At the center of this hellish cathedral sat a throne carved from a single piece of obsidian, its surface polished to a mirror shine that reflected not light but despair itself. And upon that throne sat the being that had once been Prince Albrecht, transformed by months of possession into something that barely retained any trace of humanity. The creature that was now Diablo stood nearly twice the height of a normal man, its form a grotesque fusion of what had once been Prince Albrecht and the demonic essence that now inhabited him. Red scales covered most of its body, harder than the finest armor, and sharp enough to cut flesh with a touch. Massive horns curved back from its skull, while its eyes burned with an inner fire that seemed to contain all the torments of hell. But perhaps most horrifying of all were the brief moments when some trace of the boy seemed to surface in the creature's expression. A fleeting look of confusion or pain would cross its features, as if somewhere deep within the demonic form, the innocent child was still trapped, still struggling against the nightmare that had consumed him. The Lord of Terror spoke, his voice a harmony of tones that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The psychological warfare began before the physical battle, as Diablo sought to break his opponent's spirits through words alone. He spoke of the boy's final moments of consciousness, of desperate pleas that would never be answered. The battle that followed defied mortal comprehension. Diablo commanded power that could reshape reality itself, calling forth walls of flame that burned hotter than any earthly fire, opening fissures in the stone floor that revealed glimpses of the burning hells far below. His very presence was an assault on the mind and spirit, radiating waves of supernatural terror that threatened to paralyze his opponents with fear. But the three heroes had not come this far to be defeated by psychological warfare. Drawing upon all their training and resolve, they fought with determination that matched ancient malevolence blow for blow. The battle raged for what felt like hours, though time itself seemed fluid in this realm where hell touched the mortal world. The turning point came when all three heroes struck simultaneously in a coordinated assault that finally overcame even Diablo's supernatural defenses. The Lord of Terror's death scream shattered stone throughout the chamber and sent shockwaves through the entire cathedral above. As the demon collapsed, something miraculous happened. The monstrous form began to dissolve, the scales and horns and supernatural muscle mass melting away. What remained was the small, broken body of Prince Albrecht, returned to his human form for the first time in months. The boy's eyes opened briefly, and for just a moment, they held their old intelligence and innocence before closing forever as he succumbed to the ordeal he had endured. Looking down at the child's forehead, the heroes saw the soul stone that had been driven into the boy's skull, the crystalline prison that had held Diablo's essence. Even now, with the demon's physical form destroyed, the artifact pulsed with malevolent energy. If the soul stone was left unguarded, Diablo would eventually find a way to escape and begin his reign of terror anew. What happened next would become a matter of some historical debate. In the immediate aftermath of Diablo's defeat, one of the heroes made the fateful decision to contain the demon's essence within themselves, pressing the soul stone against their own forehead where it sank into their flesh. This act of desperate sacrifice would have far-reaching consequences, as the hero who contained Diablo gradually succumbed to the demon's influence and became known as the Dark Wanderer. But those events belong to a different tale. The journey back to the surface was a somber affair. The cathedral above ground had been partially collapsed by the destruction of Diablo's realm below, but the main structure remained intact. The people of Tristram, who had waited anxiously for news of the hero's fate, received confirmation that the immediate threat had passed, though the cost of victory was evident to all who looked upon the survivors. But Aidan was ready for this assault. Where Leoric had faced Diablo's influence alone and confused, not understanding what was happening to him, Aidan knew exactly what he was fighting. The prince's will, tempered by loss and strengthened by righteous purpose, proved immune to the Lord of Terror's attempts at mental domination. "You have no power over me," Aidan declared, his sword beginning to glow with inner light as he channeled all of his determination into the blessed blade. "Your lies cannot touch me, your fear cannot break me, and your corruption cannot claim me. I am Prince Aidan of Condurus, son of Leoric the Just, brother to Albrecht the Innocent, and I will see you destroyed." The final blow came when all three heroes struck simultaneously. Morena's arrow pierced Diablo's eye, disrupting his vision and concentration. Jazreth's most powerful spell, a combination of lightning and holy energy that nearly killed him to cast, struck the demon's center mass, cracking his scaled hide and revealing the vulnerable flesh beneath. And Aidan's sword, guided by love and empowered by justice, found its way to Diablo's heart. The Lord of Terror's death scream shattered stone throughout the chamber and sent shockwaves through the entire cathedral above. The very foundations of Hell's foothold in the mortal realm began to crumble as Diablo's life force fled his stolen body. But as the demon collapsed, something miraculous happened. The monstrous form began to dissolve, the scales and horns and supernatural muscle mass melting away like wax in a furnace. What remained was the small, broken body of Prince Albrecht, returned to his human form for the first time in months. The boy's eyes opened briefly, and for just a moment, they held their old intelligence and innocence. "Aidan," Albrecht whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of collapsing stone. "I knew you would come. I tried to fight him, tried to stay strong like you taught me. But he was so powerful, so full of hate. I'm here now," Aidan said, dropping his sword and gathering his brother into his arms. "I'm here and it's over. The monster is gone and you're safe." "No," Albrecht said with the wisdom of someone who had been touched by ultimate evil and somehow retained his humanity. "It's not over. The Soul Stone, you have to take the Soul Stone. If you don't contain him properly, he'll come back. He'll find another body, hurt more people." Looking down at his brother's forehead, Aidan saw the Soul Stone that had been driven into the boy's skull, the crystalline prison that had held Diablo's essence. Even now, with the demon's physical form destroyed, the artifact pulsed with malevolent energy. Albrecht was right. If the Soul Stone was left unguarded, Diablo would eventually find a way to escape and begin his reign of terror anew. "Take it east," Albrecht continued, his voice growing weaker with each word. "Deckard Cain, he knows the old ways, the Haradrim methods for destroying demons permanently. Promise me, promise you won't let anyone else suffer like I did." With these words, Prince Albrecht finally succumbed to the injuries and trauma that months of possession had inflicted upon his small body. He died as he had lived, thinking not of himself, but of others, using his final moments to ensure that his sacrifice would protect future generations from the evil that had consumed him. Aidan knelt over his brother's body for a long moment, grief and rage warring in his heart. Around him, the hellish chamber continued to collapse as Diablo's influence over the space faded. Soon, this entire level would be nothing but rubble, sealing away the horrors that had been unleashed here. But the Soul Stone remained, and with it, the terrible responsibility that Albrecht had placed upon his shoulders. Morena and Jazreth watched as their friend and leader struggled with an impossible choice. They could see the Soul Stone's corruption working on him even now, whispering promises of power and threats of dire consequences if he failed to act. The artifact was designed to contain demonic essence, but that containment came at a price. Whoever carried it would be constantly exposed to its malevolent influence. "There has to be another way," Morena said, moving to place a comforting hand on Aiden's shoulder. "Cain will know of some method to destroy the stone permanently, some ritual that doesn't require—" "No," Aiden said, his voice hollow but determined. "Albrecht is right. This is the only way to ensure Diablo can never return. The Haradrim tried to destroy the prime evils 2 centuries ago and failed. The best they could do was imprisonment, and even that proved temporary. If I don't take responsibility for this burden, who will?" Before his companions could stop him, Aiden pressed the soul stone against his own forehead. The crystal, still warm from its residence in Albrecht's skull, began to sink into his flesh with a sensation that was part pain and part violation. As it merged with his body, Aiden felt Diablo's essence flowing into him, the Lord of Terror's consciousness pressing against his own with malevolent hunger. But where Albrecht had been an innocent child, unable to resist such supernatural assault, Aiden was a trained warrior whose will had been forged in the crucible of loss and tempered by righteous purpose. He felt Diablo's attempts to dominate his mind and met them with unshakable determination. The demon would be contained not because the soul stone compelled it, but because Aiden refused to let it free. "I can control this," he said, though the strain was already visible in his face. "I have to control this. Too many people have died already, and I won't let their sacrifice be meaningless." The journey back to the surface was a somber affair. The cathedral above ground had been partially collapsed by the destruction of Diablo's realm below, but the main structure remained intact. The people of Tristram who had waited anxiously for news of the hero's fate cheered when they saw them emerge, but their celebration was muted by the obvious cost of victory. Deckard Cain examined the soul stone embedded in Aiden's forehead with a mixture of admiration and horror. "You have done something that no mortal should ever have to do," he told the prince. "The burden you carry could destroy you, but it may also be the only thing standing between our world and utter devastation." "How long?" Aiden asked simply. "I don't know," Cain admitted. "The Haradrim records speak of others who attempted to contain demonic essence within themselves. Some lasted years, others only days. It depends on the strength of your will and the completeness of your commitment to the greater good. But eventually I'll lose," Aiden finished. "Diablo will wear down my resistance and take control. That's why I have to leave, isn't it? Get as far from populated areas as possible before that happens." The old scholar nodded sadly. "There are places in the east where the Haradrim once maintained strongholds, locations warded against demonic influence where such evil might be contained or even destroyed. It's a slim hope, but it's the only one we have." And so began the final chapter of Prince Aiden's story. Within days of his victory over Diablo, he had transformed from hero to exile, forced to leave behind everything he had ever known in order to protect it from the evil now contained within his own body. Morena and Jazreth offered to accompany him, but he refused, unwilling to expose his friends to the danger he now represented. The people of Tristram watched with mixed emotions as their savior prepared to depart. He had freed them from supernatural terror, but at a cost that seemed almost too terrible to contemplate. Children who had looked up to him as a hero now saw something dark and frightening in his eyes, while adults who understood the sacrifice he was making could barely bring themselves to meet his gaze. Before leaving, Aiden spent one last night in the monastery that had been his childhood home. He visited his parents' tomb, paying final respects to King Leoric and Queen Asilla, and said goodbye to the memory of the little brother he had failed to save. When dawn came, he walked out of Tristram alone, beginning a journey that would take him far from everything he had ever loved. The people of the town never saw him again, though rumors would occasionally reach them from distant lands. Tales of a dark wanderer who appeared in times of crisis, sometimes helping and sometimes bringing disaster in his wake. Those who knew the truth understood that these stories marked the slow corruption of a hero, the gradual victory of ancient evil over human will, but that would be a story for another day, the beginning of new legends and new horrors. For now, the immediate threat had passed, Tristram was free, and the Lord of Terror was contained. It was a victory, though one bought at a price that would echo through the ages. Chapter 7. The Aftermath and the Seeds of Future Darkness. In the weeks following Diablo's defeat, Tristram slowly began to return to something approaching normalcy. The supernatural darkness that had shrouded the town lifted, allowing sunlight to once again reach the cobblestone streets and market squares. The creatures that had terrorized the countryside gradually disappeared, either destroyed by the disruption of Diablo's power or fled back to whatever dark corners of the world had spawned them. But the cost of victory was evident everywhere one looked. Nearly half the town's population had fled during the worst of the crisis, leaving behind empty houses and abandoned businesses. Those who remained bore the psychological scars of their ordeal. Children who woke screaming from nightmares of demons, adults who flinched at shadows, elderly folk who spoke in whispers of the horrors they had witnessed. The physical damage was equally severe. The cathedral that had once stood as a symbol of faith and hope now lay partially in ruins, its holy ground so thoroughly corrupted that few dared to enter its broken halls. The royal monastery would need to be completely rebuilt before it could serve as a seat of government again. And even then, many questioned whether anyone would be brave enough to rule from a place where such evil had taken root. Deckard Cain took it upon himself to document everything that had occurred, creating a detailed record of the events that might prove valuable to future generations facing similar threats. His account would eventually become one of the most important historical documents of the age, though its full significance would not be appreciated until decades later when other prime evils began to stir. We must not forget what happened here. Cain insisted to anyone who would listen. The knowledge of how Diablo was defeated, the methods used to combat his influence, the warning signs that preceded his awakening, all of this must be preserved. Evil this ancient and powerful does not simply disappear when defeated once. It waits, it learns, and eventually it returns. The old scholar's words proved prophetic, though not in ways that anyone at the time could have anticipated. Unknown to the survivors of Tristram, their victory over Diablo had sent ripples throughout the cosmic balance between heaven and hell. The other prime evils, Mephisto and Baal, sensed their brother's defeat and began to stir in their own prisons, while the lesser evils, who had banished them, saw opportunity in the chaos. But these larger cosmic implications were beyond the understanding of most mortals. For the people of Tristram, the immediate concern was rebuilding their lives and trying to forget the nightmares they had experienced. Some succeeded better than others in this endeavor. Griswold the blacksmith threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, forging weapons and tools for the town's reconstruction while trying not to think about the blessed blades he had created to fight demons. His skill as a craftsman had been enhanced by his exposure to supernatural forces, giving him an intuitive understanding of metallurgy that he could not quite explain. The weapons he created now seemed to hold their edges longer and strike with greater force than mundane steel should allow. Pepin the healer found his knowledge expanded in similar ways, though the growth came at a psychological cost he struggled to bear. He now understood injuries and ailments that no earthly physician should encounter, possessed intuitive knowledge of antidotes for poisons that existed only in Hell's laboratories. The experience of treating victims of supernatural assault had taught him much, but it had also exposed him to knowledge that haunted his dreams. Ogden the tavern keeper dealt with his trauma by becoming the town's unofficial historian, collecting stories from survivors and visitors alike. His tavern became a gathering place where people could share their experiences and find comfort in the knowledge that others had endured similar horrors. The conversations that took place around his hearth would become the basis for many of the legends that grew up around the events at Tristram. But perhaps no one was more changed by the experience than Morena and Jazreth, the two heroes who had fought alongside Prince Aidan in the depths of the cathedral. Though they had emerged victorious from their encounter with ultimate evil, they carried with them psychological wounds that would never fully heal. Morena found herself plagued by recurring nightmares in which she relived the battle against Diablo over and over again, each time failing to save Prince Albrecht from his terrible fate. The corruption she had witnessed in the cathedral's depths had shown her just how fragile the barrier was between civilization and chaos, how easily good people could be twisted into instruments of evil. Her skills as an archer had been enhanced by her exposure to supernatural forces, her arrows now seeming to find their targets with uncanny accuracy. But this improvement came at a cost. She found herself seeing threats where none existed, her warrior's instincts telling her that danger lurked behind every shadow. The sisterhood to which she belonged tried to help her readjust to normal life, but some experiences change a person so fundamentally that there can be no true return to innocence. Jazreth's trauma manifested differently, but was no less profound. The sorcerer had wielded power beyond anything in his previous experience during the battle with Diablo, channeling magical energies that had left permanent marks upon his soul. He could now access spells and techniques that had previously been beyond his comprehension. But this expanded knowledge came with an awareness of cosmic forces that was almost too terrible to bear. Like many who had looked too deeply into the nature of ultimate evil, Jazreth found himself questioning fundamental assumptions about reality. If beings like Diablo could exist, if such ancient malevolence could corrupt everything it touched, what did that say about the nature of creation itself? These philosophical questions ate at him like a disease, driving him to seek ever more dangerous sources of knowledge in his quest to understand the cosmic forces he had encountered. Both surviving heroes found themselves unable to settle back into peaceful lives. The ordinary concerns of civilian existence, trade agreements, crop yields, minor legal disputes, seemed trivial after facing the Lord of Terror himself. They had seen the true face of evil and could never again pretend that the world was a safe or rational place. Within months of Diablo's defeat, both Morena and Jazreth had left Tristram, unable to bear the constant reminders of what they had experienced. They would go on to have their own adventures and face their own trials, though neither would ever again be the person they had been before descending into those cursed depths. Their departures marked the end of an era for Tristram. The heroes who had saved the town were gone, leaving behind only memories and legends. Some said this was for the best, that the presence of such individuals attracted the very troubles they fought against. Others mourned their leaving, sensing that without protectors of such caliber, the town would be vulnerable when the next crisis arose. And there would be a next crisis, though it would not come in the form anyone expected. The defeat of Diablo had indeed prevented the Lord of Terror from conquering the mortal realm, but it had not destroyed him. Contained within Prince Aidan's body, the demon's essence remained intact, slowly working to corrupt its unwilling host, while being carried eastward toward the very lands where his brother Mephisto lay imprisoned. Aidan's journey became the stuff of legend in its own right. Travelers reported encounters with a mysterious figure known only as the Dark Wanderer, a man whose presence seemed to bring both salvation and catastrophe in equal measure. Sometimes he would appear to help those in desperate need, using powers that seemed to come from beyond the mortal realm to defeat bandits or monsters that threatened innocent lives. Other times, his very presence seemed to attract supernatural dangers, leaving devastation in his wake even when his intentions were benevolent. Those who encountered the Dark Wanderer and lived to tell of it spoke of his obvious internal struggle, the way he seemed to be fighting some invisible enemy that only he could see. His appearance changed over the months of his journey, becoming more haggard and tormented as Diablo's influence slowly ate away at his resistance. Yet still, he pressed on. driven by a determination to find some way to rid himself of the burden he carried before it could destroy him completely. But determination alone was not enough to hold back the tide of corruption forever. With each passing day, Diablo's whispers grew louder in Aiden's mind, the demon's promises more seductive and his threats more terrible. The Lord of Terror had learned patience during his centuries of imprisonment, and he applied that lesson now, slowly wearing down his host's defenses rather than attempting a direct assault that might be resisted. The final corruption of Prince Aiden would come not through overwhelming force, but through the gradual erosion of hope. As weeks turned to months and months turned to years, the former hero began to despair of ever finding a way to rid himself of his burden. The Haradrim strongholds he sought proved to be either abandoned or destroyed, their secrets lost to time and neglect. The scholars and wise men he consulted either fled in terror from his presence or proved unable to offer any real assistance. Slowly, inevitably, Aiden began to listen to Diablo's suggestions with less resistance. When the demon whispered that their journey eastward was pointless, that no mortal power could contain a prime evil indefinitely, these words began to seem like wisdom rather than temptation. When Diablo suggested that they might find what they sought in the ancient city of Kurast, where powerful artifacts and knowledgeable priests might offer solutions to their problem, Aiden found himself altering his course to follow this guidance. What the former prince did not realize was that Kurast was exactly where Diablo wanted to go. For it was there that his brother Mephisto lay imprisoned, weakened by centuries of containment, but still powerful enough to be a valuable ally. If the two prime evils could be reunited, their combined strength might be sufficient to break free from their mortal prisons and begin the work of reclaiming their positions as rulers of hell. But this tale of corruption and reunion would be told in the chronicles of future events. For now, the immediate story of Diablo's defeat at Tristram had reached its conclusion. The Lord of Terror had been stopped, though not destroyed. The kingdom of Kandurus had been saved from supernatural conquest, though at a cost that would echo through generations. And the world had been given a brief respite from the machinations of the prime evils, though that respite would prove to be all too temporary. In the years that followed, Tristram would rebuild and prosper, its people gradually learning to live with the memories of what they had endured. New generations would grow up hearing stories of the heroes who had once walked their streets, tales that would take on the character of myth and legend as details were embellished or forgotten with each retelling. The cathedral would eventually be rebuilt, though it would never again serve as a royal residence. Too many people remembered what had lurked beneath its foundations, and few were willing to make their homes on ground that had once been the foothold of hell itself. Instead, the rebuilt structure became a monument to those who had died fighting the darkness, a place where visitors could come to pay their respects to the fallen and remember the price of freedom from evil. Deckard Cain remained in Tristram for several more years, serving as the town's unofficial keeper of memories and guardian of dangerous knowledge. His documentation of the events surrounding Diablo's defeat would prove invaluable to future generations of demon hunters and scholars, providing insights into the nature of the prime evils that would be crucial in battles yet to come. But even Cain could not remain in the shadow of such memories forever. Eventually, the old scholar too would leave Tristram, taking his knowledge and his burden of understanding with him, as he traveled the world in search of other threats to humanity's survival. His departure marked the final chapter in Tristram's brief moment of cosmic significance, returning the town to the obscurity from which it had so violently emerged. And yet, the events that had taken place there would continue to resonate throughout the world of Sanctuary. The defeat of Diablo had proven that mortals could stand against the prime evils and emerge victorious, though the cost of such victory was almost too terrible to contemplate. This knowledge would inspire heroes in ages to come, even as it warned them of the sacrifices that might be required. The story of Diablo, the Lord of Terror, was far from over, but for one brief moment in history, evil had been contained and innocence had been avenged. Prince Albrecht's sacrifice had not been in vain. King Leoric's suffering had finally found meaning, and the people of Tristram could sleep peacefully, knowing that their protectors had not failed them when they were needed most. It was a victory, albeit a temporary one, in the eternal struggle between light and darkness. And sometimes, in a world where such struggles are measured in centuries and millennia, temporary victories are all that mortals can hope to achieve. Epilogue. The legacy of terror. 20 years have passed since the events at Tristram, and the world has changed in ways that few could have predicted. The kingdoms of the West have grown strong and prosperous, their people enjoying peace and plenty under the protection of wise rulers who remember the lessons learned from King Leoric's tragic fall. Trade flourishes along roads that are safe from both mortal bandits and supernatural threats, and children grow up hearing stories of heroes rather than hiding from monsters in the dark. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, those with the knowledge to see past surface appearances understand that greater trials lie ahead. The Dark Wanderer's journey eastward has not gone unnoticed by scholars and prophets, and disturbing reports have begun to reach the western lands from the distant kingdom of Kurast. Ships that return from trading voyages to the eastern ports speak of strange plagues and unnatural phenomena, of a great cathedral whose bells no longer ring at sunset, of priests whose sermons have taken on decidedly darker themes. Deckard Cain, now truly the last of the Haradrim, has spent these 2 decades traveling the world and gathering information about these troubling developments. His investigations have convinced him that the victory at Tristram was merely the opening move in a much larger game, that the defeat of one prime evil has somehow served to awaken forces that had long slumbered in the deepest corners of creation. The eternal conflict is entering a new phase, he confides to those few individuals wise enough to understand the implications of his words. What we faced at Tristram was terrible, but it may prove to have been only a prelude to something far worse. The prime evils were banished from hell for a reason, and that reason had nothing to do with weakness or failure. They came to the mortal realm because they had a plan, and I fear that plan is still unfolding. But such cosmic concerns remain beyond the understanding of most ordinary people, who continue to live their lives with the comfortable assumption that the great battles between good and evil are matters for heroes and legends, rather than everyday reality. The merchants who ply their trade between distant cities, the farmers who work their fields in the shadow of ancient ruins, the crafters who practice arts passed down through generations, all continue their daily routines without suspecting that their world stands on the brink of changes that will affect every living soul. In Tristram itself, life has settled into patterns that would be familiar to anyone who had known the town before its brief encounter with ultimate evil. The market square bustles with activity, the tavern fills with laughter and conversation each evening, and children play in streets that have been cleansed of the shadows that once haunted them. Yet careful observers might note subtle differences. The way conversations sometimes fall silent when strangers pass by, the protective charms that hang over doorways, the tendency of the town's older residents to avoid certain areas after dark. The cathedral still stands, rebuilt and reconsecrated, serving once again as a center of worship and community gathering. But the crypts beneath remain sealed, their entrances blocked by stones blessed with wards that few living people understand, but none dare to disturb. Sometimes, on particularly quiet nights, sensitive individuals claim to hear sounds from below, not the roars of demons or the screams of the tormented, but something far more subtle and therefore more disturbing. The whisper of ancient stones settling, the echo of footsteps in empty corridors, the soft susurrus of pages turning in books that should no longer exist. These may be nothing more than the product of overactive imaginations shaped by remembered trauma. Or they may be signs that some evils are too fundamental to be completely eradicated. That victory over darkness is always temporary, while the potential for corruption remains eternal. The heroes who once walked these streets are gone now, scattered to the four winds by forces beyond their control. But their legacy lives on in the stories told around hearthfires, in the songs sung by traveling bards, in the memories of those who witnessed their courage in humanity's darkest hour. These tales grow in the telling, as all such stories do, but their essential truth remains unchanged, that ordinary people, when faced with extraordinary evil, can find within themselves the strength to stand against the darkness and emerge victorious. Prince Aidan, the warrior who sacrificed his humanity to contain the Lord of Terror, has become a figure of legend whose true fate remains shrouded in mystery. Some say he found peace at last in distant lands, that his struggle against the demon within finally ended in victory and redemption. Others whisper darker tales, suggesting that his noble intentions could not indefinitely hold back the corruption that consumed him from within. Morena, the archer whose skill and courage helped save Tristram from supernatural conquest, has become the subject of her own cycle of legends. Stories speak of a mysterious woman who appears in times of crisis, defending the innocent with arrows that never miss their mark before disappearing again into the shadows from which she came. Whether these tales describe the actual Morena or simply reflect the hope that such protectors still walk among humanity is a question that may never be answered. Jazreth, the sorcerer whose mastery of the arcane arts proved crucial in the battle against Diablo, has vanished entirely from recorded history. No reliable accounts exist of his activities in the years following the liberation of Tristram, leading some scholars to suggest that his exposure to cosmic forces beyond mortal comprehension may have transported him to realms where ordinary humans cannot follow. But perhaps the absence of these heroes is itself a kind of victory. Their departure from the world of everyday concerns suggests that the immediate threat they were called to face has indeed been resolved, that the darkness they fought has been pushed back far enough to allow normal life to resume. The very ordinariness of existence in the years following their triumph stands as testimony to the success of their mission. Yet wise individuals understand that evil is not a problem that can be solved once and for all, but rather a constant challenge that each generation must face anew. The specific threats may change, the forms of corruption may evolve, but the fundamental struggle between light and darkness continues across the centuries without pause or resolution. The events at Tristram serve as both inspiration and warning for future generations. They demonstrate that mortals possess the capacity to stand against ultimate evil and emerge victorious, but they also reveal the terrible price that such victories exact from those who achieve them. Heroes are not born but forged in the crucible of adversity, and the forging process inevitably leaves scars that never fully heal. As the sun sets over the peaceful streets of modern Tristram, casting long shadows that no longer conceal lurking horrors, the town's residents go about their evening routines with the quiet confidence of people who have faced the worst that fate can offer and survived. They have learned to live with the knowledge that darkness exists, that evil is real and powerful, and eternally patient in its hunger for dominion over the world of the living. But they have also learned that such darkness can be faced and defeated, that the light of human courage and compassion burns bright enough to hold back even the deepest shadows of hell itself. This knowledge has become part of their collective identity, woven into the very fabric of their community like threads of gold in a tapestry of memory. The children who are born after the defeat of Diablo grow up with a different understanding of the world than their parents possessed at the same age. They know from their earliest years that monsters are real, that evil exists in forms beyond human comprehension, but also that heroes walk among them, and that courage can triumph over even the most overwhelming odds. This knowledge shapes them in subtle but profound ways, creating a generation that is perhaps more aware of life's fragility, but also more appreciative of its beauty. In the wider world beyond Tristram, the ripple effects of these events continue to spread in ways both seen and unseen. Kings and queens in distant lands have begun to take more seriously the warnings of their court wizards about supernatural threats. military commanders study new tactics designed to combat enemies that cannot be defeated through conventional warfare. Scholars delve into ancient texts with renewed urgency, seeking knowledge that might prove crucial when the next crisis arises. The Zakharim Church, once proud in its certainty and rigid in its dogma, has begun a period of internal reflection and reform. The corruption of Archbishop Lazarus has forced the church hierarchy to acknowledge that even their most trusted leaders can be turned to evil purposes, that faith alone is not sufficient protection against supernatural influence. New procedures have been implemented for detecting demonic corruption, new training programs established for priests who might one day face the kind of temptations that destroyed Lazarus. But perhaps most significantly, a new understanding has begun to emerge about the true nature of heroism. The classical view of heroes as perfect beings touched by divine favor has given way to a more complex recognition that real heroes are flawed human beings who choose to act with courage despite their fears and doubts. The story of Prince Aidan's sacrifice has become a powerful symbol of this new understanding. Here was a man who saved the world not through supernatural power or divine intervention, but through the simple human choice to accept a terrible burden so that others might be spared. This evolving concept of heroism has profound implications for how society views both its protectors and itself. No longer can people assume that salvation will come from distant, godlike figures who exist above and apart from ordinary concerns. Instead, they must accept that heroes arise from among their own ranks, that any individual might one day be called upon to make the kind of sacrifices that the defenders of Tristram accepted without hesitation. The theological implications of these events have also sparked intense debate among religious scholars and philosophers. If beings like Diablo can exist and wield such terrible power, what does that say about the nature of creation itself? How can a benevolent divine force permit such ancient evils to threaten innocent lives? These questions have no easy answers, but the very act of asking them has led to a deeper and more nuanced understanding of the relationship between good and evil, light and darkness, hope and despair. Some have argued that the prime evils serve a necessary function in the cosmic order, that their opposition to divine will actually strengthens it by providing something to struggle against. Without the challenge of evil, they suggest, good would become complacent and weak, unable to recognize its own value or fight to preserve it. This view sees the events at Tristram not as an unfortunate tragedy, but as part of a larger pattern that ultimately serves the cause of righteousness. Others reject this interpretation entirely, arguing that evil is simply evil, a corruption of divine intent that serves no purpose other than its own perpetuation. From this perspective, the defeat of Diablo represents an unambiguous victory for the forces of light, a temporary but meaningful triumph that should be celebrated rather than analyzed for hidden meanings. But regardless of their theological implications, the practical lessons learned from Tristram's ordeal have proven invaluable in preparing for future challenges. The methods used to identify demonic influence, the tactics employed in combating supernatural enemies, the protective wards and blessed weapons that proved effective against creatures from hell, all of this knowledge has been carefully documented and disseminated to those who might one day need to use it. Perhaps most importantly, the events at Tristram have demonstrated the crucial importance of ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. While heroes like Aidan, Moraina, and Jezreth provided the military might necessary to defeat Diablo, their success depended equally on the support provided by individuals like Deckard Cain, Griswold, Pepin, and the other townspeople who risked their lives to aid the cause of good. This lesson has not been lost on those who study such matters. Military academies now teach courses on the logistics of supernatural warfare, emphasizing the need for broad-based community support when facing enemies that transcend normal human understanding. Diplomatic schools train their students in the art of maintaining civilian morale during periods of existential crisis. Even merchants and crafters receive instruction in how their skills might be adapted to serve the greater good when conventional solutions prove inadequate. The economic impact of the Tristram incident has also been significant, though in ways that might not be immediately obvious. The demand for blessed weapons and protective charms has created entirely new industries, while the need for scholars versed in ancient lore has led to the establishment of specialized academies and research institutions. Trade routes have been adjusted to avoid areas where supernatural activity has been reported, leading to the development of new ports and market centers that might never have existed otherwise. On a more personal level, the survivors of Tristram's ordeal have found their lives forever changed by their experiences. Those who witness the hero's courage carry with them a different understanding of what is possible when ordinary people choose to act with extraordinary bravery. They have seen firsthand that even the most overwhelming evil can be defeated by mortals who refuse to surrender to despair. This knowledge has made them more resilient in the face of lesser challenges, more willing to stand up to injustice and corruption in their daily lives. The merchant who once might have quietly accepted a corrupt tax collector's demands now finds the courage to report such abuses to higher authorities. The farmer who previously would have tolerated an abusive landlord now organizes his neighbors to seek redress through legal channels. The mother who might have remained silent about dangers to her community now speaks out to ensure that others are warned and protected. These small acts of courage may seem insignificant compared to the cosmic struggle against ultimate evil, but they represent the true legacy of the heroes who saved Tristram. For every person who chooses to stand against darkness in whatever form it takes, the world becomes a little brighter, a little safer, a little more worthy of the sacrifices made in its defense. The children who play in Tristram's streets today grow up with stories of these heroes as their bedtime tales, but they also grow up with the understanding that heroism is not the exclusive province of legendary figures. They learn that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act rightly. Despite that fear, that strength comes not from supernatural power, but from the willingness to protect what is precious even at great personal cost. These lessons will serve them well in the trials that undoubtedly lie ahead. For while the immediate threat of Diablo has been contained, the forces that allowed such evil to take root in the world remain active and malevolent. The other prime evils still exist, the lesser evils continue their schemes for dominion, and the fundamental conflict between heaven and hell shows no signs of reaching any permanent resolution. But the people of Sanctuary are no longer defenseless against such threats. They have learned to recognize the signs of supernatural corruption, to organize effective resistance against enemies that transcend normal human understanding, and most importantly, to find within themselves the courage necessary to stand against overwhelming odds. These are the true treasures gained from the ordeal at Tristram, not gold or magical artifacts, but knowledge and wisdom, and the unshakable conviction that good can triumph over evil when ordinary people choose to become extraordinary. As our tale draws to its close, we return once more to the quiet streets of Tristram, where life continues with the steady rhythm of seasons and years. The sun rises each morning over a town that has seen the worst that fate can offer and emerged not unscathed but unbowed. The scars remain in the sealed crypts beneath the cathedral, in the memories of those who lived through the terror, in the empty spaces left by those who did not survive. But alongside those scars are signs of healing and renewal. New families have moved to Tristram, drawn by stories of a community that proved its strength in the crucible of ultimate testing. Young people who grew up elsewhere come seeking to learn from those who faced down the Lord of Terror himself. Scholars and historians make pilgrimages to walk the same streets where heroes once battled for the soul of humanity. The legacy of those heroes lives on not in monuments of stone or gold, but in the daily choices made by ordinary people who remember their example. Every act of courage, every moment of selflessness, every decision to stand with light against darkness is a continuation of their story. a new chapter in the ongoing tale of humanity's struggle to build something beautiful and worthwhile in a world that often seems determined to tear down everything good. And so our story ends where it began, with the understanding that true heroism lies not in the possession of supernatural power or divine favor, but in the simple human choice to do what is right, regardless of the cost. The heroes of Tristram have passed into legend, but their greatest victory was not the defeat of a demon lord, but the demonstration that such victories are possible for anyone who possesses the courage to attempt them. In the end, that may be the most important lesson of all, that we are all capable of heroism, that we all have within us the potential to stand against darkness and emerge victorious. The question is not whether we have the power to be heroes, but whether we have the courage to make the choice when our moment comes. The tale of Diablo's first defeat is finished, but the larger story of which it forms a part continues to unfold with each passing day. New heroes will arise to face new challenges, new sacrifices will be made in the cause of protecting the innocent, and new victories will be won through the same combination of courage, determination, and selfless love that carried the defenders of Tristram through their darkest hour. This is the way of the world, that evil may triumph temporarily, but can never claim permanent victory as long as there are those willing to stand against it. The Lord of Terror learned this lesson in the depths of his stolen cathedral, and though he may return in new forms and with new schemes, he will find that the spirit that defeated him once remains alive and strong in the hearts of all who choose to defend the light. And with that understanding, we close this chapter of our chronicle, grateful for the heroes who came before and hopeful for those who will follow in their footsteps when the next test comes. For come it surely will, and when it does, may we all find within ourselves the same courage that once walked the cursed halls of Tristram Cathedral and emerged victorious against impossible odds. Closing. And so concludes our deep dive into the complete lore of the original Diablo. We've journeyed from the cosmic origins of the eternal conflict to the personal tragedy of a royal family destroyed by ancient evil, from the heroic sacrifice of ordinary people, elevated to legendary status, to the bittersweet victory that saved a world while condemning its greatest champion to a fate worse than death. The story of Diablo is ultimately a story about choice. The choice to resist corruption even when resistance seems futile. The choice to sacrifice oneself for others, even when those others may never understand the magnitude of that sacrifice. The choice to stand with light against darkness, even when darkness seems infinitely more powerful. These themes would echo throughout all the games that followed, but they found their purest expression in this first tale of terror and redemption. The world of Sanctuary that Blizzard created in 1996 remains one of gaming's most compelling and atmospheric settings, a place where cosmic horror meets medieval fantasy to create something uniquely disturbing and beautiful. Next time on Lore 2 RPG, we'll explore another epic tale from gaming's greatest stories. Until then, keep exploring those epic tales, fellow adventurers, and remember that even in our darkest moments, the light of courage can illuminate a path to victory. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of Diablo, please give this video a like and subscribe for more comprehensive lore explorations. Your support helps us continue bringing you these in-depth journeys into gaming's most fascinating universes. Thanks for joining me on this epic adventure into the heart of darkness and back again.